Let's welcome Ross Minney.
Yes.
And for the next topic, it is the problem with WordPress, a deep dive into the WordPress database. He's the founder of an Australian group of companies that craft innovative technology solutions that not only supercharge businesses and organizations, but also positively impact lives of individuals with them. His time and passion mostly lies on the Dev House, a software agency that builds bespoke web application, and he spent the rest of the time on making things, growing things, and cooking.
Yeah.
Now let's give the applause to him and give the time to him. Thank you.
I'm mic'd up anyway. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Excellent. Hi, everyone. My name's Ross. Primarily, I actually build web applications in Laravel. So you might be wondering why I'm here talking about WordPress, but we do a lot of projects where we implement a lot of our solutions into WordPress projects. And today I'm going to be talking to you about specifically the WordPress database. There is going to be a little bit of a broader discussion about WordPress performance in general, but the thing that I really want to sort of hammer home is kind of the key kind of thing that I think is holding WordPress back, at least at this stage, in terms of the way that it stores its data. So I do want to start with a little bit of a story, though, because there is a segue. I promise that there is a segue at the end of it. But last year I had the sort of opportunity to speak at WordCamp US, which was pretty fantastic. We've even got the shirt to show it off. I'd walk out, but apparently I'm not allowed to go past this line here. So I'm going to be behind this lectern. But when we were in the US, it was pretty amazing. And I think one of the things that I got that I benefited most from is just the community, meeting everybody over there. And it was pretty funny that Joe and I weren't actually the only Australians there. We had 3 other Australians with us as well. Peter, I'm not sure if he's in the room, was also there speaking. We had one other guy, I can't remember his name, but also we had Ryan with us. And Ryan, I didn't know at the time, but he was the developer for the WordPress API. Not too sure if anybody knows who Ryan McHugh is. Yes, no? So there's a bit of a story going on here. So hopefully, I didn't check with him before sort of showing this, but why is my clicker not working? Oh my God. All right. Lucky I'm standing here, eh? No? Oh my God. It's a laptop problem instead. So, I've censored parts of this photo because I don't want to incriminate anybody else, but this is Ryan here. And this is in Washington, D.C., at 3 o'clock in the morning, karaoke bar. And in this particular, I don't have a better photo. This is the best one we can come up with, the last moment. In this particular photo, they're singing Barbie Girl. But if you could just imagine for a moment that this is me on the right-hand side, that's not me, but I was up there with him. And instead, we were singing the Australian national anthem instead. And we were busting this out to like a room full of like internationals that were looking at us pretty freaking weird. And it was just a really good memory, right? And I'm pretty bummed right now because I'm not too sure if you're aware, but Ryan can't access the repository anymore after the events. And he made one of the biggest contributions to WordPress, and we probably wouldn't have kind of, I guess, front-end headless sort of stuff without his contribution. But one of the things, the segue here is that the API at least started to be integrated into WordPress around 4.5 4. And it was finally sort of released to the public in 4.7 in its full sort of form as it is today. But also in that release, they decided that it's probably a good idea if they put an index on the postmeta table on the key column. So I don't know how technical people are in this room, but if you want to look up something in a database, if you don't have an index on that column, and that table happens to be the largest table in your database, and it's usually pretty huge, it's usually pretty slow. So this will become a little bit more clear what the kind of the issue here was, and the issue continues to be to some extent further into the talk. So I did want to cover just sort of basic WordPress performance sort of stuff, because I think it fits into the broader conversation. And I thought I'd just address it in terms of these are the best practices that you really should be doing on every WordPress site, assuming you're not using kind of like headless or something like that. But if you've got vanilla sort of install, these are the things that you should be sort of focusing on, right? So making sure you're actually setting your WordPress memory limits. Try and use WordPress 8 wherever possible, because there is significant gains in terms of performance between 7.4 and 8, and particularly 8.3, but we can't use that apparently yet, because it's still in beta for WordPress. Despite propaganda, like WordPress versioning is probably something, unless you're really using it, you probably want to turn it off for performance reasons, not for storage reasons. Asset optimization, make sure you're minifying stuff right. Do you really need to use a page builder? It really slow you down your site. Don't use crap plugins. Do you use well-written plugins? Use things like lazy loading, and in my opinion, using a CDN is just a no-brainer, particularly something that's also going to provide you security benefits as well. Use all of the caches that you have available to you. OP cache is a no-brainer, except maybe in dev. Yeah, wherever possible, use Redis or Memcache. And if your platform supports it, use something like the Lightspeed plugin or Varnish. And then you had your regular WordPress sort of performance plugins as well. So the other thing I just want to hammer home is just choose a good host. And I literally was checking the previous slides, and ChatGPT came back with this response. It was a bit pretty crazy, but it must have known that Kinsta was going to be sponsoring drinks tonight, I think. So, and I don't know, it must have got confused. So, all right, I want to get to the meat of what I want to talk about today. So let's talk about a bit of a crash course in relation to databases. This is going to be as simple as possible. I don't know the technical level of people in the room, but when you have a relational database, you have a few different concepts. You have tables, which are basically just spreadsheets, for lack of a better description. You have the fields, which are the columns on that spreadsheet. And then you have kind of queries that you run on multiple spreadsheets. You can join them together to get data. Hopefully that is a really basic sort of straightforward explanation of how relational databases work. Really basic example, you might have a table or a spreadsheet where a post go into. You store information about that, like what the content is, what the title is. You have a unique identifier and a few other pieces of information. You might also have another table in your database for products that you might be selling. Once again, unique identifier, other fields or columns that tell you about that particular product. And generally, in a relational database, and this is a really simple example, if you wanted to kind of have a many-to-many relationship, which is a bit of a jump in complexity here. I keep walking towards this line, wanting to walk out. Sorry. But the way that you would sort of join these things together, particularly in instances where you could potentially have, say, a post that might be related to multiple products, you would do it in this way. So you would put the IDs of your products in one column, the IDs of your posts in another column. It's a many-to-many relationship. It's a really simple thing to do in a relational database. WordPress struggles with these. So this is traditionally how you would do it in the post meta table and the WP post table. So in this example, both your posts and your products are actually in the same table. And kind of information that is about those things typically gets stored in the WP meta table, including the relation between those two things. So the relation between your posts and your products gets stored in here. Is this kind of making sense so far? Is there any sort of, I'm happy to take a question at this point, because I want to make sure everybody understands this. Cool. So there's a few sort of issues with this. Well, there's one big issue. So in the traditional SQL sort of approach at the top, you would be essentially just joining a couple of tables. So you would have your posts, your products, and then in the middle you've got your join, which sort of kind of joins them together. This particular example is doing a free text search on the title of the product. So this will be used in an example where you might be searching for a specific product name, but as a result of that, you might want to show the posts that are related to that product. I'm not sure I chose the best example for this, but it's the best I could come up with at the time. But in a relational database, this is kind of really easy to do, and it's super quick. Like, depending on how many records there are, this would happen in a matter of milliseconds. The only way to do this, at least in pure SQL, in the post meta table or with posts, is to do what is called a subquery. So the line at the bottom, I'm going to use this because I can point with it. Excellent. So this line here is what we call a subquery. So it's doing this query here, feeding in some IDs back into this kind of parent, and then returning the posts that are related to that. Hopefully that makes sense. I just realized there's an error there. It should be doing a query on the products, not the posts. My bad. But hopefully that makes sense. So once again, we're trying to search for a particular product. Just imagine that that's his products at the bottom. And we want to get all the posts that relate to that. So the problem with this sort of, and I've already got it up on the screen, it's like 5 to 10 times slower just because it's using that subquery inside the SQL. Does that make sense so far? I've got a few nods, but subqueries are bad. Ideally, you don't want to use them unless you absolutely necessarily have to. But the thing is that it's actually worse than that. I'm going to take a drink. Because generally, WordPress doesn't use SQL natively to access the database. Typically, if WordPress was going to do this, you would be using the WQ query sort of database abstraction layer. And the problem with that is that you have to, there's no other way to do this other than sort of punching pure SQL into the SQL query. There's no other way to do it other than just to do two queries, essentially. So the first one is essentially getting your IDs for the products that you're interested in based on a search term. And then the second one is punching all of those IDs back into a second query to get all the related posts. So this is really inefficient because of kind of several reasons. So firstly, when you're doing a subquery inside in pure SQL, it is significantly quicker than doing actually two separate SQL sort of queries. And in addition to that, it also makes it a lot harder for it to make best use of kind of indexes that it might be in the database and so forth. So it's really far from ideal. It also uses more memory, all that sort of stuff. But it's even worse than that. So something that's come to my attention actually in the last 24 hours, and this is something that Kimberly brought up. I'm not sure if Kimberly's in the room at the moment, but she mentioned to me that the meta value sort of column that is in the post meta table is not indexed, which is another problem because we're relying on that in this particular query. And just to go back to the previous slide, we would also be relying on that here. So it would be a requirement to look up the sort of records based on the value that is in the value section. So not the key, the value. And by default, WordPress doesn't index it, it just blew my mind when I found that out, over and above all of this. So there are solutions to this, which is something that I think, so Kimberly was meant to be speaking in my place, but unfortunately wasn't able to. And I suspected that she was going to go into this in a little bit more detail. But one of the things that she mentioned to me was this particular plugin, which makes fixing this problem quite easy. So what this does, in addition to just basically putting indexes on columns that probably should be there to begin with, it also puts a lot of, I've lost the word for it, but it uses index that span multiple columns. And the benefit of that is that a lot of the design patterns that are used by plugins often will do queries on the database using specific fields in combination with each other. So having indexes that span multiple columns makes those particular queries significantly faster. And those queries relate to things like the author. So you're often looking up specific posts that relate to an author. So that would be an example of, because there's not by default an index for those two items, this allows you to quickly sort of add that in and means that you can get a significant performance increase. And I'm not too sure exactly what the path is going to be moving forward for WordPress here, because this is a bit of a limitation. I suspect that the stuff going on with GraphQL may play a part in terms of at least working out some sort of transition to a more performance solution than the WP Meta table. But in my opinion, WordPress really needs to have a more powerful ORM. So an ORM is kind of an abstraction layer like it has already, but it's significantly more powerful. So when you look at other programming languages like what I work with, which is Laravel, but most other languages will have quite a reasonably powerful ORM abstraction layer, which allows you to do all these complex joins, allows you to, and also have the security benefits that an ORM provides as well. So I think, I don't know of, I know that there's third-party solutions for providing a sort of an ORM layer on top of it. I think that to some degree they're still bound by the limitations. I think with those solutions you still will have the benefit of being able to put, or at least it translates it directly into native SQL once it comes out of the ORM. So at least they will be more performant for that reason. But hopefully we can find a solution for this, because I think it is the thing that is holding WordPress back, just from a performance perspective. There's lots of things that we can be doing to provide good experiences for the end user, and a lot of those are explained earlier in the slides. But in terms of providing a good experience for the back-end usage, and a good, I guess, experience for applications or websites that are very database heavy, like e-commerce in particular. In my opinion, there's not really a good solution at this stage for making sure that you can really scale those types of applications to kind of thousands and thousands of users at once, because at some point you can throw, I mean, one solution is to throw as much money as you can into processors and memory and cores, but once again, it doesn't really scale kind of horizontally very well in that instance. So that was my talk. Hopefully that gives us a bit of sort of, I don't know, room for discussion, I guess, on this topic, and I'm happy to chat with people about it. But I just wanted to kind of give my perspective on, I guess, biggest challenge that's holding WordPress back at this point. I guess based on the comments from Matt and so forth, there doesn't seem to be any, at least public, sort of indication that we're going to be moving away from this data structure that's inherent to WordPress anytime soon. So, I'm happy to take any questions. And I'll put the last slide up. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, Ross, for indexing us. And okay, we got some questions.
Thank you very much for mentioning index, WP index MySQL. It saved my life the other day. I found a duplicate field in WP options, 37,000 rows. Didn't know it was there. It was totally corrupting everything I was doing, and that plugin solved it. So everyone else should definitely use it. I'm curious, do you have much experience with HPOS in WooCommerce?
Nah,
I would just so this is basically a data structure where they're taking their orders and their products out of the structure of posts and postmeta. So and it's a big move, and I haven't really switched to it yet in my sites, but I'm aware of it and I'm tracking it, and I'm trying to understand whether this kind of structure is a possible solution. Obviously, it's custom made to the WooCommerce infrastructure.
Is that a third-party solution, is it?
Sorry?
Is that third-party, or is it?
No, it's theirs. They built it out. They're switching.
I'm out of the loop.
So they're switching to this model.
Okay, cool.
Because they need it. WooCommerce won't survive continuing to use postmeta.
Yeah.
And it's involving a whole bunch of extra work, right? Action Scheduler has to move data into those tables and so on. And there's more to it. I'm also just reminded, and I have a question, but I'm reminded of the fact that WooCommerce also does things like has special columns to index. So when you search your orders, you're actually looking in an index field that they've built. So people have been building solutions to try to deal with some of this. Obviously, postmeta is still this big beast that we can't tame. But I'm wondering whether you think beyond the overall table structure, which lots of people have argued should change, whether it really is something on top of it or outside of it, maybe like you were saying, restructuring the database layer or something. Because I kind of feel like we're not going to rebuild the core infrastructure, and it's obviously not appropriate for all WordPress websites. It's really appropriate for those really big sites.
Yeah, I mean, obviously WooCommerce sounds like it's going in the right direction with that, because they're just not going to compete with Shopify and so forth in terms of high volume sales. It's interesting that they've chosen to specifically sort of single out WooCommerce rather than kind of tackling the bigger problem. Arguably, I mean, processes and so forth are still getting quicker, so you can make the argument that maybe that it may not be as much of an issue, I guess. But the thing is, when I'm building sort of web apps, we're looking at things, and if something takes more than a second to run, like, we call that slow. Like, so, and that happens. Like, it's. I mean, I struggle to find sites that we operate that even just sort of navigate the basic WordPress admin in less than a second. You know what I mean? So it's crazy, and that's after all these optimizations. I think that if nothing else, it is something that is holding WordPress back in terms of, like, people are going to look for different solutions because performance really is important these days. It's something that they look for, particularly like when you have JavaScript devs coming through. It's always top of mind, and when they look at solutions like WordPress, it's pretty slow. So I think the way that I would see things moving forward is that it would have to be some sort of transition approach, and that's why I think that this GraphQL approach may be a piece in that puzzle. In terms of the overall strategy moving forward. These are things that I'm just totally speculating, because something like that would potentially allow, say, an existing GraphQL interface and a potential, I don't know, a new revision of it, which are accessing and storing data in different ways. So I think that there could be a path for progressively moving different things into a different data structure that would be much more conducive for performance. But yeah, it's certainly not an overnight thing. You're certainly not going to wake up one morning and have, I don't know, WordPress 7.5 or something or WordPress 7 rather, with a totally new data structure and somehow have some sort of database migration that's going to achieve that flawlessly for all users. It's not going to happen. So it would certainly be something that I would imagine that we'd be transitioning over at least several years, several different like major release versions, I'd imagine, if it was possible to do.
As a side question, do you think that there's data that shouldn't be live queried? I mean, we have databases that index searches. I had one website I worked in that their search was back-ended by Solr, so they just decided they weren't going to get a fast enough search from the native WordPress. So they just completely farmed it out, built out their indexes.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the argument there is, like if we're putting in an entire other system for kind of serving all of this data,
what's the point?
Should it be in WordPress to begin with? I don't know, you know what I mean? I did have a slide in here at the beginning that was talking about whether WordPress was even the right solution, so for a lot of cases, but it might have been a little bit even more controversial, so I think... but yeah, you know what I mean. But there are solutions. So the solutions that we often build that are in the sort of WordPress ecosystem, often we want to keep them in the WordPress ecosystem, but at the same time, they often do end up having a lot of regular data stored in them, other than just posts. Like regular kind of content posts. So it just, I mean, yeah, you've got solutions like advanced custom fields, just to clarify the real name, but and pods in particular was the first one to do this as well, where they were able to have custom content types is what they call them, which did use their own database tables. ACF is more recently sort of introduced that feature. So
I think it's the
They've brought it into Pro, apparently. So, yeah. So I think those solutions, now that they're available, might be a good solution for if the only thing you're storing in there is posts and other sort of taxonomies and so forth, it might be still okay. Because if you're just serving all of that content you're using WordPress for a blogging platform, that's probably okay. But if you're doing anything more complex with it that doesn't kind of warrant having something more powerful, like what we produce on the Laravel side of things, then yeah, it just gets a bit challenging. So hopefully that answered your question. I just spent a long time rambling there.
Any other one having questions? Okay.
I understand what you're talking about, and I've always considered it a bit of an issue myself because all the different types of posts and everything go into a single table set, and then you have your meta tables that have got all the rest. But are you more concerned about the way WordPress indexes it or the actual SQL database structure? Because if it's coming to the way it's indexed, you could basically, WooCommerce is a plugin, it's an add-on. It would be able to create its own table sets of products as independent entries that don't go into the post or post-meta fields. So anybody who actually really cares about this could write their own plugin to basically go against WooCommerce to do a much better structure within the database system itself. Are you talking about the database system or the way that WordPress indexes the databases and does SQL searches, more the WP query side of it?
A little bit of both, because certainly the structure is limiting, because even if it did have a good ORM on top of it and it could translate that back into reasonably good SQL, then it still wouldn't be as performant as it could be, I guess. I guess it's interesting that WordPress by default do not index the value sort of the post meta table, particularly when they're aware that it's being used for relationships like this. So it'd be interesting to see what's going to happen now with secure custom fields. But yeah, it's interesting. So yeah, to answer your question, I think it's both. And then just to kind of sort of be clear, like the examples that I've given here are kind of posts and products, and then we've had the conversation about e-commerce, but this actually applies to kind of almost everything that gets stored. So when you install any kind of plugin, often a lot of the information that it stores is in the WP meta table. So even when you're kind of storing things there is another table for options, so that gets populated with a lot of settings and so forth, but a lot of other information for, security plugins, SEO plugins, backup plugins. They all store the stuff here, and it contributes not only to the size of that overall table. Like I was looking at a project when I was sort of building these slides, and one of our projects has 160,000 rows, and it's a fairly basic, and that was revisions turned off. So, and it was a pretty basic website by our standards. So, and I just thought that was fairly insane. So, just reducing the size and the actual number of posts that we had on that site, if I had to guess, was probably 30 or 40 posts. But yet we had a WP meta table with 160,000 rows. So, and most of those entries are not related to posts at all. And it's not an e-commerce site, so there's no products in there. So it's just not an effective way, I think, to store data all in one table. That's kind of what I'm getting at. Yes.
I can see the fear in your face. You're like, oh God, what's she going to ask me? So my question is, there's a lot of bad things about the structure. do you think that what's the reason that it still hasn't changed since 4.4? And why is WordPress still the most used CMS? Obviously it's not all bad.
Yep.
What's the good thing about the structure?
That's probably something that I left out of my talk, right? So I think that WordPress probably wouldn't have got to this point if it wasn't for the WP meta table, because it just makes it so, I guess, interoperable with plugins. You know where things are going to be stored. You know roughly what sort of to expect in terms of how they're going to be stored. You don't have, I guess, plugin providers potentially to. I mean, this still happens to some degree in the meta table, but there's less implications or whatever of having conflicting sort of table names and keys and so forth. So it certainly is a benefit, I think, in having that certainty, and I think that's probably why it's stuck around so long, and why Matt wants it to at least continue for the foreseeable future in stable versions. So hopefully that answers the question. So yeah, it's a double-edged sword for WordPress, I think. It's definitely one of its minor strengths, but it's also something holding it back, in my opinion.
Thank you, everyone. One more question?
Yes.
Yeah, just last question. We have next session in 10 minutes.
Ross, thanks. Interesting talk. I got a bit confused just up front when you went from the native SQL call with the joins to the subselect.
Yep.
And I wasn't quite sure what it was that forced WordPress to suddenly go into the subselect. I mean, is that something that's part of, when you say with the WordPress schema, does something suddenly force it to do that rather than joins? I mean, I would have thought that would be a programmatic decision and you could optimize for the simpler query.
So the challenge there is that in this particular lookup, and it's a little bit confusing in what I've written here because it's meant to be looking for products in that last line. But what's the best way to kind of go through this?
Or we can take this offline.
Yeah, we can take it offline, but in a nutshell, the type of relationship that you would have to do would be joining the WP, joining it to itself, and that's MySQL doesn't like doing that. I think I've had something working in the past where it's been joining to itself, but it's extremely hard to do. And I think it involves using something other than subqueries to be able to achieve it. But yeah, you're essentially doing a database join on itself to some degree. I can't get my head around how it would work if we could get it working. If anybody else in the room is not standing on the stage and under pressure and can answer that question, then feel free. Yeah, correct. So, one of the things that I just kind of, I think you've nailed it there. That's the explanation. Can I just sort of say one more thing? Is that right? Yeah. One of the things that I just wanted to point out is that this is actually a really basic version of the types of challenges and the types of joins and the types of I guess queries that we often run into limitations with in the database. So I didn't want to get too complicated because then it would even be harder to wrap your head around, I guess. But this is just doing a many-to-many relationship on two kind of virtual tables. Yeah, it can get much, much more complex than this when you're doing complex SQL queries. So. Bring in term relationships. Yeah.
Oh, thanks.
All right.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Josh. Thank you. Thanks, Ross. Thanks, Ross.